The snow was meant to bury the Omega's frozen corpse, not a screaming infant. But when Hazel reached into the icy drifts, the baby's tiny fingers locked around hers. Searing pain erupted, and there, glowing on her skin, was the silver crest of the Alpha King. She was marked. The winter of 1482 in the northern territory of Frost Ridge was unforgiving. It was the kind of cold that snapped pine branches in half and froze the breath in your lungs before you could even exhale. For Hazel, a 21-year-old Omega of the local pack, the cold was merely an extension of the cruelty she endured every day. Her boots, stuffed with dry hay to patch the holes in the leather, crunched heavily against the knee-deep snow. She was miles away from the meager warmth of the village hearths, sent out into the teeth of a developing blizzard by Alpha Cedric. Her task was impossible. Find enough dry kindling in the Blackwood pines to keep the Alpha's sprawling manor warm through the night, or face the whipping post. Omegas were nothing more than property in Frost Ridge, scapegoats for the pack's frustrations and slaves to their whims. Hazel's body ached, her stomach gnawing itself empty, but the fear of Cedric's wrath kept her frozen fingers digging through the snowbanks. The wind howled, a brutal, mocking sound that masked the approaching night. Hazel had just bundled together a pathetic pile of damp birch branches when she heard it. It was faint at first, easily mistaken for the squeal of a dying hare or the wind whistling through a hollowed trunk. She paused, pulling her threadbare wool shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her wolf, usually beaten down and silent within her spirit, pricked its ears. A cry. Hazel dropped her firewood. Survival dictated she ignore it. In the medieval wilds, a sound in the dark was usually a trap set by rogues or starved predators. But the sound came again. A weak, rhythmic wailing that plucked violently at a deeply buried maternal instinct. She waded through the treacherous drifts, pushing past the sharp, ice-coated needles of the pine trees. At the base of a massive ancient oak tree, half buried in a snowdrift, was a bundle of dark fabric. Hazel fell to her knees, her hands trembling as she brushed away the fresh layer of snow. It wasn't just any fabric. It was heavy, crimson velvet, lined with pure white mink fur, material so expensive that Alpha Cedric himself couldn't afford a cloak made of them. The cloth was embroidered with a crest, a silver wolf entangled in a crown of thorns, the royal seal of the High King's lineage. With a shaking breath, Hazel parted the velvet. Inside, a human-looking infant, no older than a few months, stared up at her. His lips were a terrifying shade of blue, his tiny chest barely rising. He was dying. "Gods above," Hazel whispered, her breath misting in the freezing air. Why was a child of noble blood abandoned in the deadliest woods of the north? This wasn't a mere lost child. This was a deliberate execution. Someone had placed this baby here to freeze, hoping the snow would erase the evidence of their crime. Hazel didn't think about the politics or the danger. She stripped off her own ragged shawl and wrapped it around the velvet bundle, pulling the infant tight against her chest to share whatever pathetic body heat she had left. As she shifted the baby, one of his tiny, freezing arms slipped free from the blankets. The infant, instinctively seeking warmth, blindly grasped at Hazel's exposed hand. His remarkably strong, icy fingers wrapped tightly around her bare wrist. The moment his skin touched hers, the world violently shifted. A blinding, white-hot agony shot up Hazel's arm. She screamed, a ragged, tearing sound that echoed through the empty woods, dropping to her side in the snow. It felt as though someone had pressed a blacksmith's branding iron directly into her flesh. She clutched her wrist, gasping for air as her vision swam with dark spots. The heat radiated from the point of contact, surging through her veins, setting her very blood on fire. And then came the scent. It didn't belong to the baby, nor to the freezing woods. It was a phantom scent that hit her senses with the force of a physical blow. rich petrichor, dark amber, and the sharp, metallic tang of ozone right before a lightning strike. The scent of absolute, terrifying power. Hazel tore her sleeve back, expecting to see charred skin. Instead, glowing with a faint, ethereal silver light, an intricate tattoo had seared itself into her wrist. It was a perfect mirror of the embroidery on the blanket, a wolf wrapped in thorns. It wasn't a slave brand. It wasn't a curse. Every wolf learned the legends from childhood, though few believed them to be real. It was a soul mark, a mate mark. But not just any mark. It was the royal sigil of King Alistair of the Blood Moon Pack. Hazel stared at her glowing skin, her mind fracturing under the weight of impossibility. The Alpha King, a man known across the continents as a ruthless conqueror, a beast of war who had united the territories through blood and steel, was her fated mate? And his mark had been triggered by the touch of this abandoned, dying infant? The baby whimpered again, weaker this time. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Hazel's shock. If anyone in Frost Ridge saw this mark on an Omega, she would be accused of witchcraft and burned at the stake. If they found the baby, Alpha Cedric would undoubtedly use the child for his own political gain, or worse, kill it to appease whoever had wanted it dead in the first place. "I have you," Hazel murmured, her voice trembling as she covered her wrist, grabbed the bundle, and abandoned her firewood. "I have you. We have to hide." Hazel spent the next 3 days living in a state of absolute terror, hiding the infant in the damp, freezing root cellar beneath the pack's communal barn. She named him Leo, for the fierce way he fought to live despite the cold. Keeping him alive required a dangerous level of theft. She skimmed drops of fresh goat's milk from the morning harvest, soaking a clean rag in the milk for Leo to suckle. She stole scraps of wool from the laundry lines to build him a crude, insulated nest behind a wall of rotting potatoes. All the while, her wrist throbbed with a dull, constant heat. The silver mark had darkened to a deep, permanent onyx, sitting stark against her pale, bruised skin. She kept it tightly wrapped in dirty bandages, claiming she had burned herself on a kettle. On the 4th morning, the sky above Frost Ridge darkened, but not with snow clouds. The ground began to vibrate. Hazel was hauling water from the frozen well when the deep, bone-rattling sound of war horns shattered the morning silence. A massive shadow fell over the village. The villagers spilled out of their cabins, eyes wide with terror, as a legion of armored wolves marched into the valley. They wore armor of blackened steel, and leading them were massive, dire wolf warriors bearing the banners of the Blood Moon Pack. At the head of the formation rode a man who looked like violence incarnate. King Alistair. He was a giant of a man, with hair as black as a raven's wing, and eyes the color of a frozen lake. His presence alone suffocated the air in the village. The sheer, oppressive weight of his alpha aura forced lesser wolves to their knees, choking on their own breath. Alpha Cedric ran from his manor, scrambling into the snow in his silk sleeping robes, dropping to his hands and knees before the king's towering black warhorse. "My king!" Cedric stammered, his voice cracking. "Frost Ridge is honored. Had we known—" "Silence!" Alistair's voice was a low, terrifying rumble that carried across the entire square. He didn't even look at Cedric. His cold eyes swept over the terrified villagers. "A week ago, my compound was breached by traitors. My mate, my chosen Luna, was murdered in her bed." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Hazel, watching from the shadows of the barn, felt her blood run cold. "But they did not just take her life," Alistair continued, his voice tightening with a suppressed, lethal rage. "They took my newborn son, the heir to the Blood Moon. Our trackers followed the scent of the traitors' horses. It ended 3 miles from your borders." Alistair leaned forward, his gaze finally fixing on the trembling Alpha Cedric. I will tear this village apart, timber by timber. I will rip the thoughts from your heads. If my son is here, you will bring him to me. If you are hiding him, I will flay every man, woman, and child alive. Hazel backed into the barn, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The baby in the cellar. Leo. He was the stolen prince, the murdered Luna's child. That explained the velvet blanket, the royal crest. But the mark on her wrist? How could she be the king's mate if he already had a chosen Luna? The mythology of wolves was complex. A powerful alpha could take a chosen mate, but a fated soulmate, bound by the gods, was an entirely different, unbreakable magic. The baby's touch, sharing the king's bloodline, had awakened the dormant bond within Hazel. She had to get Leo to the king, but as she turned toward the cellar doors, a heavy hand clamped down on her shoulder, spinning her around. It was Beta Silas, Cedric's right-hand man, a cruel brute who took particular joy in tormenting the Omegas. "Sneaking away, little rat," Silas snarled, his grip bruising her collarbone. The king ordered everyone to the square. I left my coat," Hazel lied, struggling against his grip. "Please, Silas, let me go." Silas narrowed his eyes, noticing her frantic demeanor. He looked toward the cellar doors. "What are you hiding down there?" "Nothing! Rats!" But Silas shoved her hard against the barn wall. As Hazel threw her hands up to protect her face, the dirty bandage on her right wrist snagged on a protruding nail. The cloth ripped away, exposing the stark, onyx-black mark of the crowned wolf. Silas froze. His eyes bulged as he stared at her skin. What is that?" "Don't!" Hazel screamed, trying to cover it, but Silas grabbed her arm, his claws digging into her flesh. "You stole the royal crest?" Silas spat, a sick smile spreading across his face. "You stupid, wretched Omega. You've marked yourself to pretend you're royalty, or worse." His eyes flicked to the cellar. "You know something about the stolen prince." "No! Silas, wait! You don't understand!" Ignoring her pleas, Silas dragged her by the hair out into the blinding snow of the village square. "Alpha Cedric! My king!" Silas roared, throwing Hazel violently to the ground at the feet of the king's horse. "I caught this filthy Omega trying to flee. Look at her wrist. She bears a forged mark of the blood moon." The square went dead silent. Hazel gasped for air, pushing herself up on her bruised hands. She didn't look at Silas or Cedric. She looked up. King Alistair slowly dismounted his horse. The armor clinked against the silence. Every step he took toward her made the ground tremble. As he drew closer, the scent of petrichor and ozone hit Hazel so hard it made her dizzy. Alistair stopped inches from her. He looked down at the shivering, bruised Omega in the snow. Then his eyes fell to her exposed wrist. For a second, the fearsome king stopped breathing. His pupils dilated, swallowing the icy blue of his irises until his eyes were entirely black. The wolf within him surfaced, recognizing what no one else understood. It wasn't a forgery. The magic radiating from the mark was undeniable. "You," Alistair whispered, a sound so raw and shattered it didn't belong to a conqueror. He dropped to one knee in the snow, stripping off his heavy steel gauntlet. He reached out, his massive, calloused hand gently wrapping around her fragile wrist. The moment their skin touched, a visible shockwave of energy rippled through the air, knocking Beta Silas backward into the snow. The mark on Hazel's wrist flared with blinding silver light, and simultaneously, a matching light shone from beneath the armor on the king's own chest. Alistair looked up from her wrist, his dark, feral eyes locking onto Hazel's terrified face. "Mate," he growled, the word tearing out of him like a desperate prayer. Before Hazel could even process the reality of the king bowing to her, a faint, muffled cry echoed from the open barn doors behind them. a baby's cry. Alistair's head snapped up. His nostrils flared, taking in the scent of the air. He smelled the damp hay, the fear of the villagers, the intoxicating scent of his fated mate, and beneath it all, the sweet, milky scent of his own bloodline. "My son," Alistair commanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of overwhelming relief and rising, homicidal fury as he glared at the terrified men of Frost Ridge. "Where is my son?" Hazel's legs felt like lead, trembling so violently she could barely stand. But the absolute command in King Alistair's voice left no room for hesitation. The entire village of Frost Ridge held its collective breath as the colossal Alpha King fell into step behind the ragged Omega. His royal guards, clad in their terrifying blackened steel, formed an impenetrable perimeter around them, their spears levelled at anyone who dared twitch. Hazel led Alistair into the gloom of the communal barn. The heavy wooden doors groaned as they swung shut, cutting off the freezing wind and plunging them into the dim, dusty light. "In the cellar," Hazel whispered, her voice raw. I had to hide him. They would have killed him, or sold him." Alistair didn't speak. He simply gestured for her to lead the way. Hazel knelt by the heavy iron ring of the root cellar door. Before she could strain her bruised arms to pull it open, Alistair stepped forward. With one effortless pull of his massive, gauntleted hand, he ripped the heavy oak doors open, snapping the rusted hinges entirely. The stench of rotting potatoes, damp earth, and mildew wafted up from the darkness. Alistair's jaw clenched, his dark eyes flashing with a dangerous, lethal light as he descended the crumbling stone steps into the freezing blackness. Hazel followed, her glowing wrist providing a faint, ethereal silver illumination in the dark. Behind a makeshift wall of mouldering crates, nestled in a pile of stolen, mismatched wool scraps and Hazel's own threadbare shawl, lay the tiny bundle of crimson velvet. Alistair dropped to his knees in the dirt. The terrifying conqueror, the beast of the Northern Territories, reached out with hands that trembled uncontrollably. He carefully unwrapped the velvet. Baby Leo's eyes blinked open, and seeing the giant man, he let out a soft, demanding coo. "My boy!" Alistair choked out, a single hot tear tracking down his scarred cheek as he lifted the infant and pressed him against his chest armor. He buried his face in the baby's dark hair, breathing in the scent of his son, alive, breathing, and safe. Alistair turned his head, his piercing gaze locking onto Hazel. He looked at the squalor of the cellar, the freezing dampness of the earth, and then at Hazel's shivering, emaciated frame. He saw the stolen rag soaked in goat's milk. He saw that she had given the baby her only warm garment, choosing to freeze so the prince might live. "You saved him," Alistair said, his voice a low, reverent rumble. "A starved, abused Omega. You defied your pack to protect a child you did not know." "He grabbed my hand," Hazel whispered, clutching her chest. "And the mark, it burned. I didn't know he was yours, my king. I only knew he was innocent." The tender moment shattered as heavy boots stomped down the stairs. Alpha Cedric and Beta Silas had followed them, flanked by Captain Arthur, the king's towering head of the guard. "My king!" Cedric gasped, looking at the baby in Alistair's arms. He quickly plastered a look of righteous fury across his face, pointing a trembling finger at Hazel. "The Omega kidnapped him. We had no idea the traitorous witch was harboring your royal blood. I demand the right to execute her myself for this treason." Alistair slowly rose to his feet. The temperature in the cellar seemed to drop by 20 degrees. The air grew thick, suffocating with the sheer, crushing weight of his alpha aura. Cedric and Silas were instantly forced to their knees, gagging as the invisible pressure crushed their lungs. "You dare!" Alistair snarled, stepping over the rotting crates. "You dare speak to my fated mate in such a manner?" "Mate?" Cedric wheezed, his eyes bulging in horror. "But she is nothing. A rat. A slave. She is your queen," Alistair roared, the sound vibrating the very foundations of the barn. Alistair closed the distance in a single, blurring stride. He didn't use a blade. He seized Beta Silas by the throat, lifting the massive, cruel man off the ground with one hand. "I can feel her memories," Alistair whispered, his eyes entirely black. "Through the bond, I feel every whip strike, every starving night, every cruelty you inflicted upon her. But the greatest crime is that you allowed a traitor to cross your lands, and you nearly let my son freeze to death." With a sickening crunch, Alistair snapped Silas's neck, dropping the lifeless body onto the dirt floor. Cedric screamed, scrambling backward like a terrified crab. "Mercy! My king, mercy! I swear on the old gods I did not know!" Alistair turned his cold gaze to Captain Arthur. "Strip him of his alpha title. Sever his wolf from his spirit, and send him to the sulphur mines of the Dead Peaks. Let him spend the rest of his short, miserable life digging in the dark. And if any wolf in Frostridge objects, burn the village to ash." "Yes, my king," Arthur commanded, dragging the sobbing, broken Cedric up the stairs. Alistair turned back to Hazel. The lethal fury vanished, replaced by a profound, desperate tenderness. He unclasped his heavy, fur-lined royal cape, a masterpiece of thick, dire wolf pelt and spun silver, and wrapped it tightly around Hazel's shivering shoulders. The warmth enveloped her, smelling fiercely of petrichor and safety. "What is your name, little wolf?" he asked softly. "Hazel," she breathed. "Hazel," Alistair repeated, testing the syllables as if they were made of glass. "Your nightmare is over. I am taking you and our son home." The stronghold of Ironhold Castle was a fortress of jagged obsidian and towering spires, a stark contrast to the miserable wooden shacks of Frostridge. For 3 weeks, Hazel lived in a state of surreal luxury. She was bathed in hot, rose-scented water, dressed in gowns of heavy silk and velvet, and fed rich meats and sweet pastries until the hollows of her cheeks finally filled out. Yet, the court was a viper's nest. The nobility of the Blood Moon Pack were outraged. To them, Hazel was a peasant, an Omega with dirty blood who had somehow bewitched their king with a false mark. The most vocal of these detractors was Lady Genevieve, the younger sister of the late chosen Luna. Genevieve was a high-ranking noble, a woman of sharp beauty and even sharper ambition. By all Pack laws, with her sister dead, Genevieve was meant to be Alistair's next chosen mate. The arrival of a fated mate ruined decades of political scheming. Hazel spent her days in the royal nursery, refusing to let Leo out of her sight. Though she had nurses and guards, the trauma of the snowstorm lingered. She trusted no one but Alistair, and Alistair trusted no one but her. Their fated bond grew stronger every day, a silent current of emotions flowing between them. He was her anchor, teaching her that her Omega nature was not a weakness, but a wellspring of profound empathy and resilience. But a dark undercurrent tugged at Hazel. Her royal mark, the silver wolf and thorns, would sometimes throb with a dull, warning ache. It always happened when Lady Genevieve was near. The climax came on the night of the winter solstice. Alistair was forced to attend a council meeting with the territory lords, including the meticulous royal archivist, Lord Percival Stirling, who was auditing the northern borders. Hazel remained in the royal chambers, rocking Leo to sleep by the crackling hearth. The heavy oak door to the nursery clicked open. The guard stationed outside made no sound. Hazel's instincts, honed by years of surviving the cruelty of Frostridge, screamed. She gently placed Leo in his wrought-iron crib and backed away into the shadows of the room. Lady Genevieve slipped into the nursery, her elegant ball gown rustling softly. In her right hand, she held a stiletto dagger, its blade glowing with an unnatural, sickly green light. wolfsbane and liquid silver. A single scratch would paralyze a werewolf. A deep cut would kill them instantly. Such a quiet little bastard, Genevieve whispered to herself, approaching the crib. Just like his mother. Hazel's blood turned to ice, and then to boiling fire. The missing pieces of the puzzle slammed into place. The rogues hadn't breached the castle walls on their own. They had been let in. Genevieve had ordered the assassination of her own sister to take the crown, and ordered the baby to be dumped in the frozen wastes to remove the heir. "Step away from my son," Hazel's voice rang out, cold and hard. Genevieve whipped around, sneering as she saw Hazel step into the firelight. There she is, the little stray dog playing dress-up. Did you really think you could keep the throne, Omega? A kingdom is ruled by blood and power, not fairy tales and fated marks. You murdered your own sister, Hazel said, her fists clenching. She was weak. She begged for her life instead of fighting, Genevieve spat, taking a step toward Hazel, twirling the poisoned dagger. I paid the rogues a fortune to leave the brat in the snow, but you had to ruin it. No matter. I poisoned the guard's tea. I will kill you. I will kill the child, and I will tell Alistair that a remnant rogue assassin slipped through. He will weep in my arms, and tomorrow he will make me queen. Genevieve lunged. She was a trained aristocratic fighter, moving with lethal, blurring speed. But Genevieve made a fatal miscalculation. She assumed an Omega was inherently weak. She didn't understand the magic of a fated bond. As the poisoned blade slashed toward Hazel's throat, the silver mark on Hazel's wrist erupted in a blinding starlight brilliance. The power of the Alpha King surged through the bond, crashing into Hazel's spirit. The timid, beaten-down wolf inside her shattered its chains and roared. Hazel didn't flinch. Her eyes bled from their soft brown into a terrifying, luminous gold. With reflexes born of pure, primal instinct, she caught Genevieve's wrist mid-strike. The noblewoman gasped, trying to pull away, but Hazel's grip was like an iron vice. The bones in Genevieve's wrist popped under the pressure. I survived the frozen hell of Frost Ridge, Hazel growled, her voice layered with the guttural echoing resonance of an alpha lunar. I survived starvation, beatings, and the freezing dark. You are nothing but a spoiled child playing with knives. With a brutal twist, Hazel disarmed her. The poisoned dagger clattered across the stone floor. Hazel struck Genevieve in the chest with the palm of her hand, sending the noblewoman flying backward into the heavy oak table, splintering the wood. Before Genevieve could recover, the nursery doors were blown off their hinges. King Alistair stood in the threshold, panting, his claws fully extended, his eyes black with murderous rage. He had felt Hazel's spike of adrenaline through the mate bond and abandoned the council meeting, tearing through the castle. Lord Percival Stirling and Captain Arthur rushed in behind him, stopping dead at the sight of the carnage. Alistair looked at the poisoned dagger on the floor, then at the terrified Genevieve, and finally at his mate. Hazel stood protectively in front of the crib, her eyes glowing gold, vibrating with newfound power. She confessed, Alistair, Hazel said, her voice steady. She hired the rogues. She killed your chosen, and she came tonight to finish the job. Genevieve scrambled to her knees, weeping fake tears. My king! She lies! The Omega attacked me. Look at her, she's a monster! Alistair didn't even blink. He walked slowly toward Genevieve, his massive boots crushing the poisoned dagger into shards. I am bound to her soul, Genevieve. I feel her truth as clearly as I feel my own heartbeat. And I smell the stench of your lies, soaked in my dead mate's blood. Genevieve's face drained of colour. Take her to the Shadow Dungeons, Alistair commanded Captain Arthur, his voice devoid of mercy. Summon the executioner. The crows will dine on royal flesh tomorrow. Genevieve screamed as the guards dragged her away, her curses echoing down the stone corridors until they faded into silence. The room grew quiet, save for the crackling fire and the soft breathing of the baby in the crib. The lords and guards bowed deeply and hastily exited the room, leaving the king and his mate alone. Alistair walked over to Hazel. The gold faded from her eyes, leaving her trembling slightly as the adrenaline receded. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest, burying his face in the crook of her neck to inhale her calming scent. "You fought for our family," he murmured, pressing a kiss against her pulse point. "You are magnificent, Hazel. A true queen." Hazel leaned into his warmth, looking down at the intricate silver wolf and thorns permanently branded onto her wrist. It was no longer a symbol of terrifying impossibility. It was a promise. "I am no longer an Omega of the snow," Hazel whispered, resting her head against the chest of her Alpha King. "I am the Luna of the blood moon, and no one will ever hurt our family again." Did you expect that shocking twist with Lady Genevieve? Hazel's journey from a freezing, abused Omega to a powerful, fiercely protective Luna proves that true strength comes from the heart, not just bloodlines. If you loved this intense, romantic werewolf drama, make sure to hit that like button. Share this story with your friends who love fantasy romance, and don't forget to subscribe for more epic tales.